Aloha, everyone. Today, I'll be talking about my dissertation work that takes place in Hawaii with community. So, being a Hawaiian community member, I really got to grow up going to different cultural activities and interacting with our landscapes in different ways. And so, one way was through engaging in aquaculture restoration with Pai Pai Ohi'ia, which is a nonprofit that is restoring a very old Hawaiian fish pond. And when I was there, I got to see how Hawaiian community members are restoring a system that produces food but also maintains biodiversity. And above this picture on the right is me in the mountains doing plant surveys and learning a lot about native flora and fauna. And all the experiences really inspired me to conduct work in this field of conservation and agriculture. And so when I developed a project, I came to develop it here on the Big Island of Hawaii, which is the center photo on the Kona coast, which has a lot of or displays a lot of the problems and also potential that we see in Hawaii. And so when I talk about some of the issues that we have, they are many. And so one of the biggest ones is that Hawaii is considered the endangered species capital of the world. And really what this means is that a lot of our native and endemic flora and fauna are nearing extinction or are severely threatened. And in addition to that, we import a lot of our food in Hawaii. So 85% of our food is imported. And so especially during the pandemic, when there are supply chain issues, a lot of folks in the community, so in this sense, the community is the broader community in Hawaii, became really interested in sort of redeveloping or really rethinking how we develop our agricultural systems and how do we sort of sustain ourselves. And a lot of folks in the Hawaiian community were pointing out the fact that prior to European contact, our agricultural systems produced food for up to 1 million people. And so that's what these graphs on the bottom show. They show the different agricultural systems that were present in Hawaii prior to European contact. And a lot of these systems still persist to this day, um, and sort of how much food they produce. And so knowing all that our ancestors created these food systems and that we really need to increase self-sufficiency and really take care of our community, both the Hawaiian community and the broader community as a whole, there's been these very large and really poignant sovereignty movements taking place in Hawaii to restore our political sovereignty and to also restore food sovereignty. And so, with all this information that I just gave to you in terms of, what's inspiring me, what's the context going on in Hawaii, um, myself and a community partner that I approached developed the project that I'll be talking about for the rest of this talk. And this community partner is Kamehameha Schools. Kamehameha Schools is the largest private landowner in the state. They're a Hawaiian nonprofit that was formed through the will of Pernice Pawahi Bishop, who is a Hawaiian royal. And so together, we've been thinking about their lands on the Big Island of Hawaii, the state of them, and both the state of their agricultural lands and the state of their forested lands to see what kind of issues they're facing and what I can address as a PhD candidate. And so together we came up with these three questions. So the first one is, at what level of diversification, so that being the number of crops on a proportion of land, do we see significant insect and ecosystem service gains? Secondly, how do we incentivize farmers to diversify their lands? This could be monetarily or culturally. And thirdly, how do we get more Kanaka Mahi on Aina? And what this means is, how do we get more Native Hawaiian farmers on land? How do we reduce barriers that they face to get them get their hands in the soil again on the Big Island? And so a lot of folks think of farms as sort of these systems that just exist and they're just in this constant state and that's what they are. But really, a farm is impacted by the management decisions of a farmer. And those management decisions shape a farm, and then that farm shapes the sort of types of flora and fauna that can be there. And so, specifically, what I look at is insects, whole insect communities. And so, taking this all together, Kamehameha Schools and I look at the work we do through this socio-ecological feedback framework, where we we try to understand how the ethnic identity and history of a farmer impacts their financial standing and the barriers they face, how these sort of two social implications impact management practices that then impact vegetation and soil structure over space and time, that ultimately shapes the insect or arthropod community. Um, and those insects uh, produce a certain amount of services. And so this is sort of the whole framework that we rest our project in. And the Kona landscape is a really complex and interesting one. So prior to European contact, it was an agroforestry belt that really had breadfruit in the canopy and then a dozen crops or so in the understory. But through colonization, a lot of the breadfruit belt got shifted into coffee production. And so now, presently, this what once was an agroforestry belt is now sort of these little pockets of agroforestry amongst a very um, coffee-dominated landscape with pasture and other things in it. So the system naturally creates an intensification gradient that we can sample along. And so this intensification gradient goes from native forests to agroforestry to shade coffee and then to coffee monoculture. And so what myself and a large team have done is we have gone to farms along this intensification gradient, and we've sampled insects from different trees, from the soil, and flying insects as well. We've collected them into these 50 ml tubes, and then we go through a whole metabar coding pipeline to ultimately get their taxonomic information. And I won't go into metabar coding very much because this community knows these techniques or this specific technique very well. But in the end, what I'm able to get from this data is trends of community composition and whether the farm can retain native species or not by sort of creating, a plot like this. This is a stack bar plot that shows the different orders on a certain type of farm. And what we're able to do with this is also start to look at sort of the functions that different orders play, or if we can get down to family or genus, that was even better. If we can look at the function that each sort of arthropod has in the community, and begin to look at their services. In addition to this insect sampling, sorry, I'm using insects and arthropods interchangeably, but arthropods are insects plus spiders. So I should be using arthropods. So in addition to this arthropod sampling, what we're also doing is interviews with different farmers to understand their motivation, barriers, and the impacts that they have on the community. And so when we talk about motivation, this is a quote from one farmer where they talk about their work being really inspired by sovereignty. And so what the farmer says is what we're doing is not only about food, it's not only about kale. We're trying to connect people to place. The food is just a byproduct of trying to get people to connect to Aina, land, and the ultimate end result is self-determination. So this farmer is doing what they're doing to really uplift our community. So as we try to incentivize farmers to get onto land, to diversify, we really need to think about these motivations and how sovereignty is a big part of it, and how what the work we're doing can contribute to something such as sovereignty. Um, And then the same farmer talks about the barriers they face, and this includes sort of land access and financial things. And quickly, this chart on the right shows how prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, Hawaiian and non-Hawaiian farmers sent their food to different types of venues, and that shifted during the pandemic. And what I really want to highlight is that Hawaiian farmers who are in the green here always predominantly sent their food to the community, both prior to and during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so lastly, what I would like to touch on is some of the data sovereignty work that Kamehameha Schools and I are engaging in with different nonprofits and organizations, such as the Native Biodata Consortium and the Local Context Hub. And so Kamehameha Schools and I are really interested in sort of storing our arthropod reads and the stories that the farmers tell us on a secure platform owned by Indigenous folks. And so that is where our partnership with the Native Biodata Consortium is coming into place. We are in discussions about using a server that they host to store our data on tribal lands. And this would be sort of until we are able to host a server in Hawaii that can hold this type of data. And next, we're working with the Local Context Hub to apply biocultural and traditional knowledge notices to the data, and to also identify culturally significant species and think about ways that we can use Olelo Hawaii or Hawaiian language in identifying species and labeling them. And so thank you so much for listening to my talk. These are just the great organizations and folks that have given me funding, that have partnered with me, and I would just like to honor them. Mahalo.